Good morning, good afternoon, and good night, wherever you're tuning in. We are Slava and Jonathan, bringing you the Side Quest podcast, where we talk about character development, stories, and all things that are world building. And we occasionally take side quests, because, frankly, that's how conversations work. Just as a reminder, this whole show is spoiler heavy. So sit back, tune in, and join us on this episode of Side Quest. Good morning, Slava.
Good morning. How are you, Jonathan?
I'm doing well. I watched the downfall of It and Derry this last week. It was a spectacular event, to say the least.
Cataclysmic.
Yeah, that's a good word. I agree with that.
Yeah. Were you flooded with emotions?
All my emotions.
Did your standpipe burst?
All my emotions floated to the top.
It was right.
Yes.
We all float.
All the bad jokes.
Hey.
Wonderful, wonderful times. But do you have a new question for us this week?
I do, and I will readily admit that they keep going down in quality. But
guess it's a little harder to be me than you thought, huh? Zing.
Yeah, something like that. My question to you: you see a clown in the drain. What do? And he's talking to you. He's like, "Hey, Jonathan, you want a balloon?" And let's say you really like balloons.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I do really like balloons.
Which I know you do.
How do we do the... Oh, doesn't...
I think it's the count-off, because it's the count-off that sent it.
Something. We're just making gestures at each other right now, because a couple episodes ago where the Apple reactions went off and the balloons happened while we're recording an episode on it, and we both freaked out. Go back and listen to it if
you freaked out. I thought it was funny.
That can be a freak out. Laughter can be a freak out. Anyway, what would I do if there's a clown in a drain talking to me about balloons? I'd just go, "Who hurt you?" And then keep walking. Because I picture this where it is standing in the drain. Drains don't have a lot of space. So, first off, you can't get the balloon to me. So that's a waste of time. Secondly, how are you standing inside of the drain? So you had to go into the sewer, you had to walk over, you had to stand in that drain and wait for someone to come by. That already tells me you're cracked in the head. So I don't need to talk to you. I'm just going to go on my merry way. And that's before I read this book. Now I'm definitely not going to do it.
Spoken like a true adult.
I wouldn't have talked to that clown if I was a kid either. Been like, "The fuck? What are you doing in there?" And been like, "Something doesn't feel right about this. I'm going to go do whatever I was doing." I was a pretty skeptical kid, so.
Yeah, so was I. I remember my parents trying to put me to bed one night, and this is a really stark memory for me. They're trying to put me to bed, and they are telling me, "If you don't go to bed, we're going to tell Krampus, and Krampus is going to come and kidnap you and make you his slave, and you will be shoveling snow off of clouds." I'm like, first of all, father figure or male parental. No, that's not how it's going to work, because clouds are not solid. And they're like, you're 5, shut up and go to bed.
Yeah.
I don't remember how I articulated the fact that clouds aren't solid in my 5-year-old brain, but I said something like, "You would fall through a cloud. We flew in a plane through clouds. There's no people on the clouds." Something like that. I remember saying something, in a kid-like fashion, and they're like, "Okay, just shut up and go to bed. Krampus or no Krampus, you need to go to bed." But yeah, I was a very skeptical kid too. I didn't believe in Santa. I didn't believe in Krampus. And my parents didn't foster those beliefs in me at all, but out of the blue, they decided to scare me or, threaten me with Krampus. I was like, okay, Krampus. I got your Krampus right here.
Did they tell you about Krampus, like when you were young, on a regular basis?
No, hell, maybe. That was the only memory I have of it, though.
Interesting.
And you know how funny memory is.
It's always correct and never wrong, even if what you believe happened didn't.
Right. No, that's exactly it.
No, that's not it. That was a test, and you failed.
Oh, I forgot.
Fine. All right, you literary adventurers, hit that subscribe button so you never miss out on a side quest.
Indeed. So, on this part 5, episode 67, discussing Stephen King's It, we are in part 5 of the book called The Ritual of Chüd, and it covers chapters 19 through 23 and the last interlude. Now, we're going to go into the stratosphere to cover this section, at least the overview portion of it. We'll get into the details of the chapters. But we have 1985. Mike says it's time for sleep. They will meet the next day to go to the Barrens. He says there's another force, at least there was when we were kids, that wanted us to stay alive and do the job. Maybe it's still here. In 1958, Beverly's father goes all nuts, assaults her physically, attempts to assault her sexually while he's under the influence of it. We go back to 1985. The scene is interrupted and shifts to Mike at 1:55 a.m. Now, one thing to note, scenes really end abruptly here between 58 and 85. Even worse, the characters are saying are dragged from one scene into the next.
Yeah.
So he's at the library, 1:55 a.m., and Henry Bowers attacks him and puts him in the hospital. We go back to 1958. It's Henry doing what Henry does. He's assaulting Beverly and is threatening her with a knife. A man named Mr. Ross watches and then goes inside without helping or speaking. And Henry scares away an old lady who does try to help. Beverly kicks Henry in the crotch and spits in his face. And Henry's again bested by the losers, and it drives him insane. She runs down to the Barrens, and they chase her, meaning Henry and his goons. Beverly reaches the clubhouse with Henry close behind. But Ben is there. She goes inside, and they close the lid to the clubhouse to hide. Very cute scene. Back into 1985, Henry gets to the hotel the losers are at with the help of a supernatural car. Tom dreams of killing his father. He is called by it to go after the losers and to kidnap Audra, who is lured outside by it. Back in 1958, the losers are chased into the sewers for another fight with Henry and it. They defeat it again and make a pact to come back if it does too. Back in 1985, the losers fight it for a final time and win. Derry is destroyed during a cataclysmic flood. And there we have, like I said, this is not 10,000 feet, not even 30. We're at satellite view here of this section, but there's so much to cover. I figured we would get into those discussions instead by doing chapter by chapter dive-ins.
Makes sense. There's a lot to cover, and we're going to do kind of a speed round here because otherwise we'd be here all day.
And I got things to do. I have a wine expo to attend.
Is that what you guys are doing later?
Yeah.
Interesting.
Town that I go to when I meet my buddy, we usually have breakfast and then go to Dave & Buster's and just hang out. That's kind of our routine when we get together.
The shtick.
The shtick, indeed. Bacon and eggs, a couple of video games at Dave & Buster's, beer in the lunch. But this time, he found out that a wine expo is coming to town, to that particular city. And we're like, well, forget Dave & Buster's. Let's check out the wine expo. I've been to wine tastings. I've been to wine highlights or whatever you want to call them, exhibitions at wineries. But I've never been to a convention center with an expo. Wineries are going to come and showcase.
And it's just wine. It's not like food and beverage.
Who the hell knows? I've never been. But nevertheless, lest we wander, part 5, it really jumps back and forth constantly between present and past. Like I said, often in mid-sentence. And it tries to relate separate battles the losers had with it as children, then as adults. And there are parallels in both fights, including Bill's exposure to the underbelly of it and Bill's trip into the void. Want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, well, the chapter overall, it was a little hard to follow in book form, but I know because of my filmmaking background that this would be a very easily translatable scene to put into a movie. And so at some point I'll probably pick up the flick and give it a watch and see how purist, I guess, they did for the most recent one. You're shaking your head at me.
I am shaking my head at you. Both adaptations are good. as campy as the first one is, it's still good, but it is campy. And I do have some nostalgic feelings towards it. The second adaptation, which is the 2017 and 2019 movies, part 1 and 2, is really freaking good. But there's a lot of creative freedom taken. And even though some things are one-to-one, there's a lot of omission of some things. And then the backstories of characters are changed. How they fight it is changed a little bit. The confrontations with it are changed. I mean, not for all the characters, but for some. For example, Beverly is still meets Mrs. Kirsch, but Mike meets it a different way than the book. He doesn't see a bird. Mike's story has changed that he lives with his uncle and his parents died in a fire instead of his father almost dying in a black spot years before Mike was born. So anyway, I digress. So there's a lot of changes that are made in the movies, but the essence of what King was writing, I think, is captured best in the modern adaptation.
Okay. So
if you want to watch them, please watch them. They're freaking great, all three of them. But now, having read the book, you will see that a lot has been changed.
And you said that there's 2 parts for the new one, 2017, 2019?
There's 2 parts. Yeah.
Huh, okay.
Yeah, there's It Chapter 1 and It Chapter 2. And It Chapter 1 starts with Georgie. It Chapter 2 starts with Adrian Mellon being thrown off the bridge. Yep. And then it follows kids, and then it follows adults. So it separates the timelines completely.
Oh, interesting.
There's only 2 or 3 overlaps where it ends with the losers making the pact, and then it flashbacks to the losers making the pact, and then goes into the 2 stories. So there's 1 or 2 overlaps like that when the kids and the adults kind of remember, or the adults remember their kids self.
That is a really different storytelling style. Interesting. Anyway, back to chapter 19. The side quest over. Yeah, the back and forth was a little hard to follow at times, but I understood what King was going for. And I think that, again, I said this, if not last time, the time before, that I'm just trying to take all the information in and figure out what's going on for the story. And so I think that it's difficult to appreciate all of the storytelling techniques and elements that he used to make this such a unique book, because I can tell they're there, but I don't have time to appreciate them because I'm like in the story for the first time, which is a bunch of new information. So I understand why he did it. I think it's a good, fun thing and technique to use, especially with just like the ending of a sentence, or, ending mid-sentence and then jumping into the next scene. Like, that's a really easy and like very unique way to have made a film. I don't know any other books that have tried it. So like doing something different in book form, like I'm very pro experimenting with storytelling. So I really, really like that.
Yeah, for sure. And that's why I like China Mayville and Chuck Palahniuk, because they write in a ways that normal people don't think to write.
I think we said this before, or I said it before. It's like a gastropub. Like, you can serve me a hot dog and fries just from like a Coney around the corner, or you can serve me like hot dog laced, tea to start me off, and then like a mashed fry combination with a little scallion sprinkled on top, and they're cut into waffle fries, but they started off as mashed potatoes, and it's just like, that's a gastro experience. It's still the same meal, but it's like, it's very different take on it. Hot dog water sounds gross, though.
I was gonna say, you drink a lot of hot dog water,
among other things.
Excellent. You'd fit right in Derry.
I don't know about that. I don't think that's the metric for fitting in a Derry.
Well, one thing that happens to people in Derry is they become dogs buddies, or servants of it.
Dogs buddies?
Yeah, that's what King calls it. Dogs, DOGS buddies.
I don't remember that, but all right, I believe you.
He used the term only like a handful of times.
I was going to say, that I don't remember that at all, but okay.
In any case, it uses humans as servants to do its bidding sometimes.
Yeah.
That happens a couple of times.
A lot. It's literally what the whole book is about.
Is it, though? Is it a book about it using people as servants, or is it about it just eating people and kids?
I've won this one, but we'll let the viewers decide.
All right, viewers, what is it about? Is it about servants of it, or is it about kids beating an evil entity from ago? Anyway, so servants. The way Al Marsh's possession occurs, it's kind of a foreshadowing for another man in Beverly's life that would also be possessed by it.
Yes, 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 yes. Her father.
Yeah, Beverly comes back from the Barrens. She's concerned about what her father will do to her, but assumes it will be one of his usual beatings. That's such a lovely scenario. But these beatings, we know as the readers, especially in the second read around, is because of his sexual obsession with her. And when she comes back this last time, Beverly notices that her father appears to be kind of in a daze. He's in his usual violent self, but he also seems as though he's being directed by a force outside of him. Now, this scene was
It was tough.
it was more than tough. Like, it was enraging. I've read this book numerous times, and each time I come to this, it's a scene that angers me, like a justified, righteous anger.
Yeah.
Because what you said before we started recording, this is your own flesh and blood. Listen, you shouldn't rape kids at all.
Yeah.
But this is your own flesh, and forget the sexual obsession. Take that away. Beating your kid senseless just because a thing popped into your brain, a thought, an idea that you have some sort of a complex with.
Yeah.
Listen, the world we live in is full of this. So I'm not being a Pollyanna here, but it gets me angry reading this scene.
Yeah, I say this scene was tough because I understand that it aligns with Beverly's character and character development, and I think that it was right for King to put this scene in. It doesn't mean I enjoyed it. And the question after we talk about this chapter a little bit more that I'm going to ask you, and so you can start thinking about it now, is what makes good art? Beverly's childhood scene was a really tough read, but it evoked emotion from you and from me, which is what I guess I'm getting ahead of myself. What good art should do. We can dive into that more in a minute. It was a really difficult scene to read because I've got nieces and nephews, and like I've got friends with kids that I care about, and man, if I found out that one of them was doing that, I would probably go beat the crap out of them. Just be like, what the hell is your problem? Because it's like unacceptable. Unacceptable.
No, and for me, maybe it's triggering because without the sexual aspect of it, I've had, and I don't want to make this into a trauma dump for the audience, but I've had this happen to me where my mom would go into violent screaming rages over nothing, over perceived faults or perceived offenses or something that was a complex for her. The world was coming undone. So it could be a trigger for me, but I also just can't stand like when somebody is vulnerable and defenseless for a bully to come in and pull this kind of stuff. It gets me riled up.
Yeah,
Now I know this is just fiction, but still, it evokes an emotion, right?
Yeah, but we've all been to the mall and watched a parent berate and harass their kid, let alone maybe smack them a couple times, and it's just like, should I step? Like, where's the line when you step in a public setting when you see that happening, right? Like, because nobody wants to be told what to do. No one wants to be told that they're parenting incorrectly, but sometimes they are.
Yeah, and you never know what's going on. You could have met that parent at the last bit of patience that he had with just a shitty kid, and he's just yelling because he or she has lost control.
Yeah,
which is still not a good thing.
And they didn't get their ice cream or something like that. Yeah. Something silly.
So something silly and still wrong to do in public.
Yeah.
Like even if you're arguing with your girlfriend, your kid, I don't care. Yourself, act like a normal person in public. But a lot of times what I think it is just shitty parents being shitty parents in public. You know, more times than a good irate parent losing control, it's probably somebody being a dickhead.
Yeah, like Beverly's dad chasing her down the street trying to sexually assault her.
Dude.
And nobody doing anything about it.
Right? Yeah. Which brings up an interesting point, and it's going to be repeated, or it should have been repeated because we should have noticed this earlier, or at least brought it up, is how trauma is exacerbated or repeated over and over because nobody does anything to step in. Where the kids, like the little kid Lars, he sees Al Marsh turn into a spider, like thing. But the adults are like, yeah, I guess you really crossed your daddy, huh? He's going to take you to the woodshed. And the fact that a 12-year-old girl is running, screaming, she's crawling underneath garbage trucks to get away from an obviously raving lunatic. And the guys are like, I guess daddy's going to spank you. Like, what? What? Like, and I get it.
It's a different time period for sure.
It's a different time period.
Right.
But this is also Derry. And Derry is special.
Which exacerbates the problem for sure.
But Beverly gets away, and I really do think the scene is sweet with her and Ben huddling in the hole, and then Belge Huggins being Belge Huggins. He's just talking to himself and like making veiled threats, calling them babies or something, and the fact that he's walking right above them and sounding like an idiot. Both Ben and Beverly start to like laugh. It kind of lightens the scene. Where okay,
a little bit, yeah,
they're going to be okay. And this is after Henry gets kicked in the balls and spit on for like the third time. This kid,
he's not very good at being a bully,
and he doesn't take hints well. Like, you have been bested, you have been beaten in a rock fight, you have been kicked in the balls twice now, by a fat kid and a little girl, and you still can't say uncle, dude. You're just leave it alone. Your victims literally have bested you twice. 3 times. We're thrust back into 1985, and Mike is attacked by Henry. Now, something that's interesting is after Mike is attacked by Henry and Henry goes outside, do you know what kind of car picks him up? Because he gets picked up by a car. And I think Victor Crisp is in it. Yeah, I think Crisp is in it. But it's a 1958 Plymouth Fury. This may or may not be true, but the guy from the first episode that I gave a shout out to, he picked this up, and I think it's interesting. He says that 1958 Plymouth Fury is Christine, which is a supernatural car.
Is that another King thing?
That's not a King thing, yeah.
Got it. Okay. Not going to pick that up because I've never read it.
More stuff for the audience, you obviously.
Sure, yeah.
And I've never read Christine either, so I didn't pick it up until I listened to a guy who has read Christine.
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, he attacks Mike, goes to attack the other losers.
Yep.
And then we have the scene where Beverly and Bill cheat on their spouses. They have sex, which...
Yeah, that happens.
That happens.
That's a thing.
And I've listened to many podcasts discussing this, and everybody seems to be offended by it. Or that's unnecessary. I don't see Bill cheating on his wife. I don't like the fact that King put this in. I think this is unnecessary. And I understand their perspective. And this goes back to the art question that I'm kind of building up to. Does it make sense for Bill and Bev? And I don't mean sense in the moral thing. You can have moral objections to... Yeah. I have moral objections to cheating on your wife. I love my wife. I don't want to cheat on my wife.
Right.
I don't want her to cheat on me.
Right.
So... outside of the moral aspect of this, which the audience knows us by now, worldviews matter, and you'll never escape that. I can still say Bill is wrong for cheating on his wife, but within the story, does it fit knowing what happens in chapter 22? And does it fit that Beverly's and Bill's friendship is different than the other losers, right?
I want to pause you right there because I don't think that you can make a comment about what happens to chapter 22 in asking the question, because at this point, if I put the book down, what happens in chapter 22 doesn't matter because I don't know. And so I think that as you're unveiling a story, it should make at least some sense with where it's put and why it's put there, even if that sense is it adds a new question. I don't think that you can just throw things in willy-nilly, and I don't think King does that. But I think that it needs to have purpose in the story with context of where it's at. Like, you're not going to put Interlude 4 in the spot where Interlude 1 is. Because then it's going to go, that's weird. I don't understand anything. Yep. As opposed to provoking, like, Interlude 1 where you're like, oh, that's interesting. That adds to whatever. And it provokes questions where you're interested and provoked to read more. So I just wanted to interrupt with that one comment about chapter 22 because I don't think that that's a fair measure.
Fine. But your comment / question or interjection is answered by my following note.
But by the one that you were gonna say is after if I would have let you finish.
Yeah.
All right, hold up. I'm with Kanye West. I'm gonna let you finish.
So I think it fits, not only because of Stephen King's storytelling and that figure 8 infinity loop that I told you, and how things repeat and how there's parallels and memory, repetition, that storytelling that ebbs and flows between timelines. I think that's why it's here. And that's the only connection to chapter 22. We'll get there. But he, meaning Bill, is the only man in Bev's life who ever demonstrated loving authority. Bill also encouraged Beverly to believe in herself, as when she doubted that she could shoot the werewolf. So she's always had admiration for Bill, like they all did. It's Big Bill. He's the leader. And in her life, the leaders that she knows, whether it's Tom or her father, and we're not getting into gender role discussion. This is just the time that it's written in. It's assumed some sort of leadership. The man takes some sort of leadership role in the relationship.
Yeah.
Deal with it. So in that time frame, in this world, both fictional and the world that King operates in when he's writing these things, Bill is the only man that has shown her any loving authority. Mm-hmm. And I think in preparation for the fight with it, and the way it's written is just a natural progression of things. And it's not done gratuitously. It's not done like, well, we're just screwing now.
Right. There's a clear difference between what happens between Bill and Bev and Beverly and Tom. Like, yes. There's a clear difference here.
Yeah.
So definitely agree with you there. I think in context of the characters, though, I understand why Beverly would do this. I think everything you said is correct and makes sense. What I don't think was emphasized enough was Bill's attraction, even if it's not physical attraction, but like the draw to Beverly. I think that was lacking. It was sprinkled here and there, but not enough to make me think that Bill would cheat on his wife.
I agree 100%. I think that's why some of the people that I listened to had an aversion to this scene, is because Bill just kind of goes, oh, here, I guess I'm cheating on my wife. Oh, well, here it goes.
Yeah, and Bev didn't even seduce him. She was just like, do you want to do this? And he was like, well, I don't know. Maybe. I mean, well, he's like caressing her breast. I mean, I guess so. And like grabs her nipple. It's just like...
Okay. I think you're oversimplifying it. But yes. Essentially, without the Forrest Gump voice, that's how. It's not Forrest and Jenny. This is Bill.
Sorry, I don't know how to do a stutter. But big Bill. I don't know.
No.
My Forrest Gump voice is better, so I used it.
I think he feels us. Okay, let me say it this way. He does feel a bit of guilt for doing it, which is I shouldn't even say that because it's irrespective of what I'm about to say. When he's about to do the act, he says a line that this is how it's supposed to be, I guess, or I'm paraphrasing.
Yeah.
And that goes into the repeating patterns of the story, how what happened as kids will happen as adults, and they have to act within certain rules. And that goes back to that thing that we've only touched upon, is adult rules and kids rules or laws. And I think by acting within, it will come back to this at the very end for the epilogue, by acting as a kid, like by using kid laws, he's able to beat it the second time too. And here with Audra, it sets into motion the events that will put them in front of it to fight, right? It's that art piece that we're about to discuss. This is King saying 58 is repeating in a different way with different kind of events, but it's repeating in principle. In essence, it's repeating for the setup to fight Pennywise again.
Right. And I think this isn't a great transition, but I do think that we should move into the conversation about art, because we have a lot to cover and we are only like through chapter 1, but I think this conversation about art is good. And so the question that I was going to ask you that I scattered about here is, what makes good art?
Well, I think it's something that you inadvertently gave up
I let the cat out of the bag early, huh? I let the it out of the sewers too quickly.
You did. And the simple answer is it evokes emotion. It makes you think. It gives you pause, right? Like when I look at Hopper, Edward Hopper, I really love Edward Hopper, an artist, early American artist, and he has that famous diner scene where two diners and a waiter and the empty street, and the diner is lit, and there are just three of them in this diner. But he has this other one. It's this woman in a pink, I guess, nightgown, or let's call it a nightgown. She's sitting on a bed and she's looking out a window. And the window is definitely of an urban setting because it looks like there's an apartment building or a factory with a water tower on top of it. And we get her full body profile, and she's looking out the window, lights hitting her, there's shadows, and she's just sitting there with her, legs together and her arms over her knees, looking out the window. It's a simple painting. It's just a woman looking out the window. But for me, there's just this sense of serenity. A woman in the morning, whether she's just awakened or she's just relaxing, I don't know what she's doing. She's just in her nightgown on the bed looking out the window. It gives me a sense of peace. Like I look at it and I'm like, wow, she's just sitting there thinking about stuff, enjoying the view of the city, which I've done millions of times in the cities that I lived in.
Yeah.
Chicago and New York, when I lived in those cities, I would often look out my kitchen window, bedroom window, and just look at the cars going by, looking at city life. Sometimes when the cities would be closed because of it's too early in the morning or it's, a holiday, and you're just sitting there and lost in your own thoughts. And that's what I think she's experiencing, this woman in this picture, this painting. It gets you kind of wrapped up in an idea that you normally wouldn't think about as you're going day to day doing marketing and drinking coffee and having meetings ad nauseum.
Indeed. I think that sums it up well. I don't think I have anything else to add in terms of what makes good art. So I want to pose a question to the audience, like, what do you think makes good art? And do you agree with us? Do you disagree with us? So, throughout the episode, if you think of something, just drop it in the comments. Anyway, lead us into chapter 20. Let's hit a little more of the high points because we're already like a half hour into this episode roughly, and we have a bunch more things to cover. So.
Yeah, we do. So chapter 20, the circle closes. Tom is dreaming about killing his father. Audra's dreaming about running in sewers. They're both really stand-in doppelgangers, for lack of a better term, for Henry and Beverly. And this is its way of getting them outside. And Audra, even though influenced by it through fear to go outside and grab Bill, that's done to get Tom in front of her, who's now influenced by it to do harm to the losers and to Audra. And so he kidnaps Audra, brings her in front of it. Later we found out that he shits his pants and dies because it's so terrible. So Big Bad Tom, when seen Pennywise in its true form, dies like a dog.
Yeah. One thing that stood out to me about this chapter was this is the first instance where we see it pulling people from outside of Derry that are not our main characters. And so it provokes a question, why does it have the power to do that? And if it has the power to do that, why didn't it create more havoc by pulling other people to Derry?
That's a good question. Henry gets pulled from like a few towns away, if you know anything about, the geography of Stephen King's universe. Juniper Hill isn't in Derry. I think Juniper Hill is in a different town. But the immediate thing that pops into my head is Derry's enough. The losers are more trouble than he's used to, right?
But this is supposed to be a semi all powerful being who's creating their own additional its. Fast forward to the scene with the spider and the eggs.
Yep.
So you want to stay under the radar. Yeah, there's a pride thing here. Powerful creatures don't like being bested, but even before the kids, why didn't it? And I realize that I'm kind of breaking the book here at the moment with this question, which I don't mean to do, but it's a question that comes to me as a world builder and a person who thinks about within the context of the story and the power that this being has, why didn't they pull other people into Derry even in the past in some of the interludes? Now, I understand that King has a limitation in his writing and not in his like ability to write, but in like the story he's trying to tell,
Mm-hmm.
which is probably why it's not even addressed. And I also understand that I think more peculiarly than other people, and so most people don't ask these questions.
No, I think it's a good question, and I think it is answered if you're paying attention. Not that you weren't, but it's paying attention in a way that only a second or third read through would help you pay attention to.
All right, lay it on me. Lay it on me.
When we get its point of view, it's the first time it's felt fear. It's
Mm-hmm.
the first time it's felt a sense that something isn't going its way. It never needed to go to any other town. The Derry citizens would do its bidding willingly or apathetically because it sat there for thousands, if not millions of years. Derry was founded on top of its resting ground.
Mm-hmm.
And it was like, this is nice. Now I get to wake up and have breakfast, so to speak. Breakfast for the next 3,000 years. Well, it's not 3,000 years, 1776.
Whatever
So,
the timeline is.
yeah, like when the dairy company first settled. So it never felt this because nobody ever challenged it until the losers came along, and it senses a different kind of power from them. They're in tune with the turtle, and Bill's even in tune with something that governs what the turtle does. So a being more powerful and more benevolent than the turtle,
Mm-hmm.
and it senses fear for the first time. So now it's stacking the deck, just like a prideful, all-powerful
Mm-hmm.
entity
Mm-hmm.
will when it's cornered, like a rat or a spider. So that's your answer. And it's not given to you directly and saying, here, reader, here's why this is happening. But it's given to you in the POV of it. I don't want to even say hinted at. I think it's given clearly, but it's a flashlight shown in a corner instead of a spotlight shown on the whole
Yeah,
house.
yeah. So, okay, I mean, that's fine, except for the fact that it is known as the Eater of Worlds. To be an Eater of a World, you have to eventually have eaten a whole world twice, at least.
Well, it's working. Give it time. It's doing the best it can.
I'm just saying. Anyway, let's just keep moving. But you understand my point?
Point taken, but Pennywise is
Okay.
doing the best it can.
Well, I don't think that that's true. I mean, maybe actually.
Well, his best is not good enough. Obviously,
That's right. That's
to
what I was just thinking. Anyway, let's keep going.
he needs to tick up the child murders. But
Oh, one more thing on chapter 20 here with Audra and Tom. I don't really feel like they added a whole lot, honestly.
Mhm.
Like as characters, like
Yep.
I didn't really, I don't really care about them because they're so late. They're introduced so late. Honestly, I think I care more about Tom, not in a like, oh, I hope he doesn't die, but like more emotion is evoked for Tom in hoping that he dies because of what he did to Beverly, as opposed to Audra, who doesn't really get any play here. She's like a cardboard cutout of a woman, like, and I don't feel bad about saying that because that's like we get very few scenes with her, and like, oh, it's alluded to. The cardboard cutout alludes to the fact that she loves her husband and she wants to go help him. That's fine, but like, she's not a real character.
Yeah, I agree. And this is going to sound like I'm talking out of both sides of my mouth because I am happy that we get a little bit of them, but we don't get enough for me to care beyond that. Oh,
Right.
okay, Audra loves her Bill, and it's nice that she came to Derry. I think that makes Bill and Audra's relationship better, or it solidifies the fact that Bill's the most stable of the group more.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, okay, that's fair.
A little bit of a highlight, but other than that, you're
But she's a
absolutely
side
right.
piece. Like, yeah, she doesn't do anything. Like, it does give context though. Like, and this is why I call her a side piece. Is like it makes that thing we talked about a minute ago with Bill and Bev sleeping together. Like, it adds contrast to that and juxtaposition. So like, but this is like my point. She's a cardboard cutout. Honestly, I think would have been more powerful if we never met her. Where it's like Bill has a wife. You know, maybe we get the one scene in the interlude, but like that's it. And then it's like, oh man, Bill cheated on his wife. Like, what a D-bag.
Yeah. And that's why I know I sound like I'm talking out of both sides of my mouth because I'm agreeing with even that. But reading about her, having the scene in it, I'm like, okay, that's kind of, endearing. And again, it highlights, underscores their relationship. But beyond that, it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
And if she wasn't in the scene and we just know
Wouldn't
she's
notice.
worried about him, she's
Yeah.
worried about him in England, that would make it stronger.
Yeah, I think so.
We still know that she loves him and she's worried about him because of the way they're introduced.
Yeah.
Yeah. But we're going under the city. Forget what's going on above the city with Audra and Tom, who are also going under the city, but let's go with them. Chapter 21, aptly titled Under the City. This chapter begins the monster's point of view in August of 1958. Before the universe, there has only been two things. One was it itself, and one was the turtle. The turtle was a stupid old thing that never came out of its shell. It thinks that Derry has been created in its image. The imagination of people on Earth make them more susceptible to fear, which is what makes them taste better to it. And that's part of that is a quote from the book on page 1023. So now it knows they're in the sewers, right? In this POV that we get, it knows the kids are in the sewers, and it hates that they ever made it fear them. It is worried that they are being supported by another higher power, and the monster promises itself that it will make them suffer before it will, quote, cast them shrieking and insane into the deadlights. Page 1025.
Mm-hmm.
It hates these kids because they made it fear for the first time in its existence, which is supposed to be from a go. Now, these deadlights, that's something that's beyond its physical form, and they're a sea. I'm quoting an online source that kind of summarizes books and tries to unpack them for readers. It's a sea of destructive orange lights that drive most humans insane upon sight. In the book, Bill nearly glimpses the dead lights, but survives. And the only person to fully see the dead lights and recover is his wife, Audra. Very Lovecraftian again. We have these things that are outside the world that make viewers of it go insane.
I really love that somebody else did something Lovecraftian. I love that they did it in a unique way. I love that they took a story that most of us are familiar with, even, ancillary, or like even through another party, like we've heard of it before, the Three Billy Goats Gruff. However, something that's lacking from a Lovecraftian story is the psychosis is here. The deadlights cause psychosis. They cause this, driving of insanity. But we never get the direct link of watching someone go insane at the same caliber that we get from Lovecraft. We get snippets, which is good, but I think part of the power of Lovecraft is there's all this mystery, and then there's like one moment where he shows you the link between like the idol and driving the men in the submarine insane. There's a connection point that empower everything you've seen in the story up until that point, and it's like a trigger point, right? I know that we get that with Tom a little bit earlier, but it just didn't feel satisfying the way that it does in Lovecraft stories.
I never thought about that. I just accepted the fact that the deadlights catacomb people or put people into a coma so that it could feed on them later.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I mean, you threw me the bone earlier episode where you're like Lovecraftian Bucko 101, whatever. And it's just like, so that's the things that I think about when I read something like this. And it's like, it doesn't mean that I don't appreciate the story. It's just like, I think that could have been tightened up just a little bit by showing us either Bev's dad, like having an incident where he stares into the dead lights, or Henry Bauer's dad staring into the, like, show me these people going insane with one or two scenes. Doesn't have to be a lot. And show it to me in this last part. Like, really drive home the next time I read it, where I'm like, oh, I know what this is leading to, because they get driven insane because of da-da-da-da. Or don't make the deadlights be the thing that causes them insanity. Make it the voice of it. Or like something that like really hammers home all of the experiences we've seen, because it 10x's those moments we've had. And so that's just like a storytelling critique, but who am I? It's Stephen King. Like, he's made millions of dollars, and I'm just some guy on YouTube, making a podcast that people listen to.
Right. I never thought of it, but I think that's an interesting point. And I tend to agree every time you make this critique where, hey, if we get 2 more sentences on the world or 2 more sentences on the backstory of a character or a scene that portrays or reveals something, that would have been just an extra morsel,
Mm-hmm.
I will always agree with you. Even if I will push back and say, but hey, you're given
Yeah,
this and hey,
yeah,
you're given this,
yeah.
I'll concede that if we got what Jonathan wanted, in addition to what I would say is the answer to Jonathan's point, like if we
Mm-hmm.
just an inch more, yep, probably been a little bit more interesting perspective of it. Like if it described how it makes people insane, if within the POV,
Yeah, POV would have been great too. Like,
yeah,
oh, I draw them in by using their comfort first, and then I do this, and then once they're comfortable, I snatch at them, or whatever it
yeah,
is.
there's a little bit of that. See, here's my how the volley works, and it's great. There's a little bit of that in the POV where he goes, people are so simple, like their fears are so simple. I can just show them whatever they fear, and they're mine. So that we get a little bit of that. I'm paraphrasing, but
I
that's in
know. Yeah,
there.
yeah.
Yeah.
Anyway, to bring us back, because this is an interesting chapter. I have another question on once we get a little more into it.
All right. So we have another flood. This is the first major storm that the town has seen since 57, when Georgie died. However, this storm is more violent and is accompanied by an earthquake. A church bell that doesn't ring, a standpipe that bursts. These are little things that tell the reader something big is happening. Outside of the fight with it, outside of the adults coming back and the cycle repeating, there is something about this particular cycle that is a little different. And so its proximity to even the standpipe that just is getting destroyed, to this shit pipe, I think Eddie calls it, is a reminder of how it uses human waste from toilets to terrorize the group.
Yeah.
Because it talks to people in the drains. It mocks a mother's grief after it kills her daughter. That's how it gets better. Beverly. The leper, for instance, is covered with vomit. Later, Mrs. Kirsch's house. Beverly notices that her cup of tea is actually feces. Bill falls into a pile of sewer feces, all sorts of nasty stuff when he reaches the end of the pipe.
Mm-hmm.
And then a rat runs past his hand. So there's this connection with shit. And I think maybe because of King's research ability and because he was a raised Methodist, so I'm sure this has come up sometime in theological discussions or something, or just because he's a writer and a researcher. In the Bible, say often like devil or the Beelzebub, the Lord of Flies,
Mm-hmm.
it's associated with, like waste dumps, barrens. So for me, when I read those parts, I was like, this is almost kind of biblical, in a small b kind of way.
Mm-hmm. Did you feel like this last chapter, written from its perspective, threw you off while reading it? If not,
No,
probably not this time, but like when you first read it.
I don't remember it throwing me off, and I've enjoyed it the last 2 times I read this book. When it was coming, I was like, oh, a scene change. Let's call it a scene change, right?
Mm-hmm.
Where there's the movie 58, 85, 58, 85. We get the back and forths. Then all of a sudden, there's like a intermission, but the intermission is really part of the movie.
Right.
You're like,
right.
oh, and now we have it talking, and we have its point of view, and I think it's great. I enjoyed it. It didn't throw me off at all. I thought it was well placed, that it was towards the end of the book. But at the end of the book, we see its point of view in 1958, because that's when it first started to fear. And then we see it getting pissed in 85.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why it wants Henry and Tom and Audra. It's stacking the deck. Its placement, the POV's placement, I think is wonderfully done. Because if we got its POV right after the fight in the bathroom at the Neibold house, or in between the two cycles of its return,
yeah,
I've been like, oh, okay, yeah, it's scared. Okay, I get it. The kid's scared. Right. But then you have all this buildup of the characters. You have their stories. You have them as adults. You have them coming back. All the stuff we've said in previous episodes that we've enjoyed about the last 3-4 parts. And here, boom, in the middle of part 5, we get its perspective. I thought that was well done.
Yeah, I agree with you on the pacing, and I agree with you that storytelling wise, making it an exclusive chapter from POV of a character that we've seen wreak havoc is more powerful at the end of the novel, and more powerful because you only get one of them, right? Like that's really beautiful storytelling where you don't need to get it is the antagonist, the enemy of this book, not like a protagonist that we want to follow and we're cheering for. So we don't need a bunch of chapters from its POV. But for world building, I think it was really nice. My critique aside, I think it's really excellent. Like his storytelling in this book is so unique, and it does not surprise me on how well it did and how much of a cult classic it became. It's solid all around, even with my couple critiques, and I'll have more before we're done with this episode, but clearly not necessary to be a successful book, still really good, right? So I liked this chapter a lot because it was like, oh, this is a really good change of pace. This is a good change of perspective. Opens up, and this is that thing that I was talking about a minute ago about the deadlights. Like it packs a wallop because you've got all of these experiences leading up to like, oh, we've watched it do this and we watched it do this and we kind of know about it, and then it's like, now I'm going to give you its POV, and it's like, oh man, and it just expands. It 10x's everything we know about it leading up to this point. It's really great.
Yeah, I agree.
Now let's talk about killing it.
Yes, yes. Let's move into the Ritual of Chüd, chapter 22. And this is where it announces itself as the Eater of Worlds, which is, I think, a declaration that it lives by feeding of others. That's what it means to it. And both in the literal sense, because it eats like parts of their flesh, as well as the metaphorical sense of consuming images from people's minds and using them to sustain itself. Here's where I think you have another answer to your critique / question comment about, well, if it's the Eater of Worlds, what does it do? Well, it's not a literal one-to-one to Nyarlathotep, who is sent, at least in the Lovecraftian universe, to...
I thought you said it was, though, last episode.
If I said that, I apologize. I meant that it's based on Nyarlathotep, not that it's a one-to-one rewriting of Nyarlathotep. King definitely drew inspiration from Lovecraft all over the place. When I said I think Pennywise is Nyarlathotep, I think when King was writing Pennywise, he thought of this guy, and that's why there's similarities like destruction and shapeshifting and mind screwing of its victims. Maybe then its eating a world is not complete destruction. Maybe it's just sitting here and goes, I'm going to eat people and their world, but it's going to be figurative in the grand scheme of things, but literal when it comes to me grabbing a victim and needing to sustain myself off a victim.
I mean, I guess I can see where you're coming from. That feels less Lovecraftian to me then, the way you've just described it, than an otherworldly being coming to Earth to eat the worlds. And if you're right, which I mean, you're more of an expert on this book than I am, then it to me it diminishes the Lovecraft aspect of this.
I got you. Well, and I don't know, because when you said that I made the claim that Nyarlathotep is a one-to-one, if I'm even saying that correctly.
No, I think you are. It's just such a mouthful.
Right. Is a one-to-one to Pennywise. I didn't mean it as a completely one-to-one. I think it's based off of Pennywise.
Sure.
And there is evidence in my mind that, yeah, who else but Nyarlathotep, because he comes from outside of our dimension. He comes here, he shapeshifts, he eats people, he destroys worlds, and ultimately his goal, if I'm to believe the people who analyze Lovecraftian literature, they say that ultimately, from the lore, Nyarlathotep is supposed to eat Earth and destroy it.
Right.
Now, when King writes it, does it really diminish it if he takes that and kind of, softens it, for lack of a better term, and says, no, he's just going to eat continually on Derry, and the eating of worlds is going to be figurative? Or if he came from out of space and he's destroyed, 7 worlds before Earth, he's just getting started in Derry, and maybe eventually he would have eaten all of the world, but hey, 7 losers came together and that up for him. So, what's more interesting, I think, is the discussion about what happens in the sewers with the kids here, because they beat it, right? Eddie dies, which we can spend maybe 2 minutes on Eddie's death. I think it's kind of fitting that he sacrifices himself for the losers. The scrawniest kid with the asthma problems gets to play the valiant hero. He gets to leave Myra and his unfulfilling life and his medicine, and he gets to do the big heroic gesture.
Yeah, it's pretty redemptive for him because
Yeah.
he's had such a terrible life with
Yep.
the overbearing mother. Like, overbearing mothers literally stifle their children from ever succeeding. Like, it's not good, psychologically speaking. So don't do that. But also, like, what'd you call it? Munchausen effect?
Munchausen by proxy syndrome, yeah.
Remind me what that is, just in the audience.
Munchausen syndrome by proxy is a psychological disorder, and it's marked by attention seeking. It's often with the mother, and the person seeks attention by exaggerating made up symptoms. So Eddie's always sick. Eddie has asthma when he doesn't. Eddie can't play baseball. And the mother feels good because she's able to be the support for this children. She gets validity from the manufactured need that the kid has.
Yeah.
So Munchausen syndrome is when you think you're always sick. You seek attention by faking symptoms if you have Munchausen syndrome. Munchausen syndrome by proxy is when you fake syndromes in your kids or the people under your care.
Got it. Okay. So that said, it's a really redemptive moment when Eddie gets to be the sacrificial lamb for the group because he has never had the opportunity to have a win, really.
Yeah.
It's always been, oh, Eddie, don't do this. Oh, Eddie, don't do that. And in a variety of our side quest commentary, we regularly talk about, like, you get the opportunity to achieve your potential in life regardless of your past. So the fact that Eddie, I mean, I don't really think he liked his life after he left Derry with his wife and realizing the meds and, like, all that stuff. So it could have just been a way out for him to die with a little bit of honor, more so than Stan did.
Yeah, because when he's walking the Derry in the walking tour chapter, he says watching the boys play baseball was one of the happiest times of his life. So he didn't even get to enjoy
playing baseball.
He just got to watch other kids.
Yeah.
Yeah. So him being the hero, I don't think he was trying to, this was his way out. I don't think he pulled the Stan at the end.
Yeah.
But I think it served purpose. His life served purpose. And when he saw it wasn't a way to end his life. It was a way to do something he never got a chance to do. And he did it with fervor and bravery.
Yeah.
And that ended his life, but he also did something, and he saved the losers. And he saved them previously, too, by knowing the directions of the sewers and how to get it. So he brought them to the battle. The battle ensued, and he died in battle to protect them. So I think it's very, I don't know, it's poetic almost.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is.
But the scene I want to talk about, and it always gets talked about, is the scene in which Beverly has sex with each of the boys. And it's received a great deal of attention and criticism.
Rightfully so, but yeah.
Yeah, particularly in how it deals with the quote-unquote awakening experience shared by all the club members. So I'm going to give us the critiques, and I'm going to give us the defense, because I've seen both, and then we'll get into it. So the critique is, it's unnecessary, it sexualizes young children. Some readers criticize it as exploitative and out of place. The defense is, because Beverly does not frame it as a sexual experience, and because she only climaxes with Ben, which, whether you frame it as experience or not, she's still having sex. And they argue that it's significant for the group identity and their transition into maturity. So this is where they finally stop being kids. That's some of the defense. Why don't you go first, and I'll say my piece. Since you're the first-time reader, you get to go first.
Oh, nice. Okay. Okay. Well, before the episode, this scene led Slav and I to have a discussion about the brand of side quest, which was interesting. So I'm glad that this was in the book in terms of like the progress that it helped us make in better defining the types of books that we read. Because if you listen to one of the earlier episodes, and maybe it was episode 10 or 20 or something like that, we're like, well, we're never going to read something like 50 Shades of Grey. Like romance novels are not part of the brand of this podcast. So that's just like a comment that you can hold us to. Smutty romance novels specifically. But like we've read other books that had a little bit of sex in them. Warbreaker has sex in it. We didn't record that yet. We're actually going to do that in the next season, I guess if I can call it that at the moment. We're going to go through that. But it brought up this idea of like, well, what are the lines? Specifically for our podcast, but even more so for like books and art and stuff like that. Because this felt out of place to me and I did not like it, and it did evoke emotion. So like art wise, fits the bill there. But I understand this awakening thing that he was going for, and the fact that, to your point, which I'm sure I'm going to steal your thunder here for a second, but it is Slava's point, like the fact that Beverly's raised in a abusive household would lead her to do something like this. That's in character. That makes sense to me. Kids do weird things, again, to your point, which I'm stealing right now, because they're curious, but they don't really know that they're playing with fire and things. But this was another tough scene for me to read. And I told Slava, I said, if you would have told me that this was in the book beforehand, I would have questioned like if I want to read the book. Because this is like, even though it's not, it's written, I don't want to say artfully, but maybe that is a better word, but it's like written tastefully for what it is. I don't like it. I understand why it's here, but it's not for me. I'm not a fan of it. I understand why it's here, but yeah, that's the simple version.
Yeah, sort of the same perspective for me. I don't think it's necessary. I'm sure there could have been another way for them to be awakened, even if it was a little bit more, transgressive and unorthodox, if you will. It didn't have to be sex, but King chose it. It's
Yep.
there.
Yep.
I also think it's not written in some sort of over sexualized, grotesque way.
Yep.
But I don't think it's necessary. And it's there, so we're going to have to live with it.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
here we are. So we're discussing it. And if we're going to do the whole Doyleist versus Watsonian critique, in world, in character,
Makes sense.
makes sense because kids who've gone through traumatic experiences often experiment with sex early because that's just what happens.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm sure a psychologist or somebody with a degree in this could give you even the reasons why the brain of a kid will go to this place without them even knowing what sex really is. Just like Beverly, who doesn't understand what sex is, even when she sees the kids who are lighting their farts on fire, she sees them, almost, well, not almost, she sees them naked in the scene in the Barrens, and her father's disgusting words to her about seeing if she's intact because he's sexually attracted to his own daughter. She doesn't understand the full capacity or consequence, effects, the complexity that is sex. She doesn't understand any of it, and yet she has an inkling to do something. So that means that in kids who are abused, and this has been proven over and over again, they do somehow gravitate to sexual experimentation because they're abused, right? I think that's what King was getting at, and that was the plot device that helped the kids awaken. Having said all that, I think it's unnecessary. It would have been fine if it wasn't there. But I will also agree with King, who said it's curious that in a book with murdered children, the sex scene is what everybody got furious about. That's a valid point. And that's not him defending himself for writing a sex scene with kids. That's him just saying, like, hey, first of all, there's murdered kids, and I am describing their murder in graphic details.
Yeah.
But he will also come back to say, and this is secondary sources, so who knows if he really said that, but it's been quoted enough in reputable sources. He said, yeah, if I was rewriting the book, I wouldn't write that scene in But in 1984, 85, when he was writing the scene, it seemed to fit the story he was telling.
Right.
And I'll
Right.
give it to him. Fine. I still
Yeah. Yeah.
think that when I read it this time around, I was less put off by it than the first. Well, I don't remember what I thought of it the first time. I was that age of the kids, but I remember reading like in my late 20s, and I was like, oh, that's freaking weird. I don't like that.
Yeah.
And reading it now, I'm like, yeah, that's weird. I don't want to read about kids having sex,
Yeah.
but it's in the book, and I think King had a reason for it, and there we are.
Well, of course, yeah, definitely. I think that's uncontestable. Like he definitely had a reason for it. But I want to go back to something you said real quick, and then we need to move on. Is people were up in arms about the sex part, but not the murder part. And I think that's a super valid point from King towards society, because we as a society, regardless of whether or not you're religious, still hold sex to be sacred in some way. Even if you're doing one night stands and like that's the way you want to live your life, whatever. Like we still hold sex to be sacred, which is something we should take pause on because it is meant to be sacred. So, like, it should cause people pause because it is the union of two souls. Regardless of if you're not religious, like, there's a reason that if you have sex with someone, you can't stop thinking about them because you've done something not just in the physical realm, but in the spiritual realm too. So, like, I think it works in the book. I don't like it, but I think it works.
Yeah,
But I also understand why people are up in arms about it more so than killing, even though killing is also the loss of a soul. So I think King makes a really strong and interesting critique towards society to be like, this is what you guys are upset about, and to illuminate the part of society where it's like we still hold some things to be sacred even if we don't know why.
yeah. I think that's a good the closer for that portion. So now, out of the sewers we go, and Derry is flooding.
Noah's Ark, let's go.
Dude, standpipe is falling, and millions of gallons of water rush out, sweeping many houses and their foundation to the barrens. And at 10:02 a.m., downtown Derry simply collapsed. That's 1112, page 1112. After the canal bursts. So things are falling apart. Derry's falling apart. Again, the collapse of the standpipe signals both the loss of one of Derry's best known monuments, as well as the loss of the water supply on which the fire department depends. So this is two-prong attack. Like, if you want to call it an attack, there's two things that are happening at once, right?
Mm-hmm.
This makes the town more vulnerable, and the demise of it coincides with the collapse of Derry, again demonstrating their interdependency. So not only was Derry being fed on, it sort of kind of fed Derry because there was the success of Derry, success of some of its citizens,
Mm-hmm.
even though there were Atreians, it still had to be a town that was attractive and, produced some sort of economic, vitality or vibrance or stability for its citizens. And you notice in the book, after it falls apart, people come in and say, we'll rebuild, we'll build them all, we'll do this. And then they're like, actually, this is a shithole. We're not going to do anything because the influence of it is gone. So that's an interesting, I think, I don't know what you would call it, but King's little underscoring of how it and Derry are interdependent. Then what I found very interesting, maybe we can spend some time on this and then go right into him saving Audra, is it speaks to Bill as though it was the devil, offering Bill more years to his life and other selfish temptations to convince Bill to let it live. This is it at its wit's end, right? This is it in a corner. He's like, all right,
Mm-hmm.
fine, you bested me. I will give you life. I will give you anything you want. You want your wife back? Anything. I'll give you, you can live until you're 120 and be a millionaire. Just let me live.
Something that I think would have been curious is if like Henry was there or something and heard it saying these things and took the deal,
Hmm.
right? Like, and this is not a critique on like the book should have whatever. It's just like I'm just curious, like if Henry would have taken the deal on something like that, and then we see like Henry gets empowered with some sort of extraterrestrial power or something, at like how King would have wrote then being power filled Henry's body, something like I don't know, whatever it would have been. and then they still kill it, and then Henry collapses or something, like, where, we get to see a truth behind, like, the power that it held beyond just leading people to be murdered. I think would have been curious to see.
I think so too. I think, yeah. So I wouldn't change the book.
No, no,
I'm
no, no.
happy the way it ends. I know you made that point too. But if there was fan fiction of Henry getting a chance to do this, I don't know, because he would have to kill the loser. So Bill's dead and Richie's dead. Beverly's dead. Everybody's dead now. And Henry's standing in front of it, and it rewards him for a job well done. And instead of being some sort of, shit stain, he becomes a famous actor or something, which he can still be a shit stain. But he gets his wildest dreams. And whatever an inbred farm boy from Derry
Woof.
dreams about.
He always wanted that farm down the road that Mike's parents had.
Yeah, it'd have been a very dark, twisted, kind of satirical fan fiction, but I would read it.
I believe you. You'd probably say we should read it and discuss it.
Maybe it's a bonus episode, but probably not. But hey, if one of you in the audience,
you'd have to write it first,
right? If one of you in the audience wants to write this fan fiction, we might read it.
So we didn't talk about the crushing of the eggs or the spider yet.
Oh yeah,
we kind of skipped over that.
We did. Why don't you bring us back to the spider crushing?
So at one juncture, while the kids are moving in toward it, they see it as a spider, as like this natural form, I guess, the original form, for as much as they can see an original form. They defeat it.
Yeah. So let me throw in something else before you go. Audra, before she goes catatonic, she sees it and goes, "Oh my God, it's female," and then existence ceases for her for a little bit, at least mental. It is female, but again, from the lore and from the analysis that I read, whatever we see of it, if we're going to we stick with the Lovecraftian influence here, whatever we see of it is what our minds can only conjure up. Because it is from a different set of rules and realities than we are.
Right. Exactly. Which gives question to, because I think Lovecraft does this better than King in terms of describing that, being more eerie and unsettling and stuff. King just doesn't focus on it, which is okay. It just, I think Lovecraft does that better. But that extrapolates into the fact that, like, the power of it goes beyond natural understanding, and, like, I would have loved to have seen another curious thing. Like, I would have loved to have seen that explored a little more, where, we did see it explored in the terms of, like, it appeared in different ways to people, but mostly about the madness, seeing how the madness came at different people. But anyway, so it is a spider. It's a she, sort of, but not really. And it has laid eggs to reproduce itself. And this is another, like, curious, not saying the book needed to be changed, but it would have been interesting if it expanded a little bit, is seeing something like Derry start to happen somewhere else because one of the eggs had already hatched. Right? We don't get an idea of how long eggs take to hatch. We don't get an idea of how it feeds the eggs. Just that there are eggs and it's trying to reproduce itself. And they smash all of them. All the eggs.
Yeah. So this seems, and it'll be supported by the next few points that we make, this seems like its final chapter. No pun intended. It is killed.
Mm-hmm.
It's bested finally. Derry is relieved of its influence. And here's a note that I wrote. After sending it away, the group realizes that they have nothing else that's keeping them together, despite the bond that they fostered. And that happened in 58, and it's happening in 85. In 85, Bill never wants to play in the Barrens again. It's like, yeah, I'm done with this stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And then eventually they all leave Derry before they go to high school. And in 85, they start forgetting, what happened. Their scars started going away. The stutter goes away. Well, here's one more note real quickly, and I'll let you jump in. The forgetting first occurred in the late summer of 58 when the group sent it away. Detail of the encounter disappeared, and then the group nearly forgot everything until they were called back by Mike. And now the second time they're forgetting, Mike regards this as a cleansing. which will allow the group to live new lives, to start their lives over again. Because despite the first forgetting, it kind of followed them all the way through, because it knew of their existence. It was pissed for 58, and it was drawing them back in 85 to finish them off. And here we have a cleansing of Richie going back, Ben and Bev moving in together and going to start a new life, Bill eventually saving Audra, which we'll talk about in 2 seconds, and going away. And now it's a fresh slate for the losers.
Yeah. It's fun to see the storytelling element he has of like forgetting as a piece of the story. And Mike attests to this, that his pen is fading in the course of a couple days, even after just writing it, and then addresses like, well, I could just keep rewriting this stuff, but at some point it becomes futile to do that, because what's the point? You just have to let it go. And I think that fits well in the book, where it's this letting go of childhood.
And what's interesting to me is Bill repeats the gesture that Georgie made on their last day together. He kisses Mike's cheek when they say goodbye, right? It's kind of like, yeah, they're brothers, they're friends, they have a bond, but they're probably never going to see each other again. Yeah. So, and then finally here, my final note, them finally besting it leaves Mike without a purpose, or at least a feeling of not having a purpose. He has been watching out for it and been chronicling it for the last, 30 years almost, 26, 27 years. And his part in this predestination thing, whatever you want to call it, they were meant to fight it. We briefly touched upon that. And the losers' roles are over. They've done what they could, and now they're moving on.
Yeah.
But one more thing. Audra's still in a coma.
Yep.
And Mike tells Bill, you better do something, because the more you forget, the less of a chance she has of coming out of it. And so what does he do? He gets on Silver, and Silver is the bike from his childhood, right? So he puts her on the bike and begins to ride with her. He tells her, we are going for a fast ride. And then he begins to shout his famous catchphrase, "Hi-yo, Silver, away." And that brings her out of the coma. So one thing that I want to underscore, and then we can end it here, is as Audra comes out of this coma that she's been in because of the deadlights, it's that final act of child law, right? The final exhibition of it. Because when Bill rode that bike, he lost his sense of fear and became capable of doing what seemed impossible. Like when he and Richie outpaced the werewolf on Neibolt Street, like when he escaped near death twice, getting the medicine for Eddie after Bowers punched Eddie during the dam building. And it ends on this kid-like faith that Bill has that his comatose wife will regain her, herself. She'll come out of the coma if he does this one last ride with Silver. And our story ends on a happy ending. It ends with Bill, the stable of the group, the leader, Big Bill, recovering his wife from its grasp, and supposedly the other losers who didn't die, Stan and Eddie, Rip, they go on to lead good lives, supposedly.
Seems that way.
The movie depicts as them staying in touch. And as sweet as that is, I kind of like King's ending better. That
the drifting and the forgetting.
The drifting and the forgetting.
Yeah. I think it seems more slice of life to have that happen. I'll save this question for next time, but I want people to leave these in the comments. What are your favorite storytelling elements or techniques that King used in it?
Yeah, that's a good question. And for those in the audience, the only place you can leave us those comments is Spotify, or you can do it on Instagram. That's even easier for everybody. And the Instagram account link is in the notes, in the description notes. So visit us on Instagram if you can't do Spotify, and talk to us.
And we're going to land this plane a little abruptly because we got a couple scheduled things we got to get to. But we have one more episode. It'll be with one of our favorite guests, Jess, who's coming back to share with us. But for right now, make sure that you literary adventurers hit that subscribe button so that you never miss a side quest.